driven in plus cars. This life is a rap star, it's nothing without God. Was born rough and rugged, addressing the man public. My attitude was fuck it, these motherfuckers love it to be a soldier.
All right, let's talk about some tournament outlooks. And, we're going to address the college basketball scandal. I don't really know what to make of the scandal per se. I mean, a lot of information, came out this last week or so. And, Sean Miller obviously got in trouble, but all the players are still playing. Now, I don't really know what it all means. And, the Alonzo Trier, his suspension is completely not anything about being paid. They found PEDs in his system again. He had PEDs in his system last year. He missed some time. And he's supposedly going to be out indefinitely because of it now. Supposedly he has they're saying that it's the same stuff from the year before, and that it could just be a remnants of it or something like that. I don't really buy it. But we'll see. I don't really care whether he's doing it or not. Obviously it's illegal, so he's not going to get to play, but yeah, I mean, it's more of, not a good look for him. A lot of stuff going on in Arizona right now. But Miller's out as Sean Miller's out as the coach right now. Obviously he still has a job there, but he's out as of right now. And the whole scandal, I think players should be paid. I think that it's really bad, all the money that the NCAA makes. And I think that it's really fitting how this scandal came out right before the tournament started. I don't know if it's to, get everybody geared up for the tournament, get ready for the tournament type thing, make everybody kind of pay attention, or if, the FBI really is just trying to shit on the NCAA right now, and they came out with this stuff right before the tournament started. I don't really know which one is what it is. And just, to talk about just players in general, I mean, players have always been getting compensation that they're not supposed to have. I think this is something that's gone on for a long time, to get players to come to your program. You give them benefits, or you give them things that other teams aren't. So I don't think this is something that's new. I think this is something that's been going on. I think, the NCAA is just kind of getting on top of it or FBI was really on top of it because the amount of money that now is being thrown around. We're not talking about a pair of shoes. We're not talking about a dinner. When you talk about the DeAndre Ayton, 100K supposedly is given to him. Bruce Bowen and was the guy at the first of the year that got in trouble, and he supposedly got paid $7K to commit to Louisville, which that never really happened. Now he's at South Carolina, but I don't really know. At the same time, they could be using Sean Miller as a kind of as a example. I kind of felt like they were using Louisville and Rick Pitino as an example earlier in the year, and I really think that Rick Pitino I was looking at it as Rick Pitino got fired at the first of the year because of the scandal. But I think what Rick Pitino actually got fired for was all the wins that they've got taken away, the 2013 championship that they've taken away from them now, which I don't really agree with. I mean, they still won the game. They still were a really good team that year. Regardless if they had players they weren't supposed to have, they still won it. That was a good championship game. That was a good tournament, and I'm gonna remember it as Louisville winning it, regardless. But anyways, I don't really know how the scandal is gonna go down. I don't really see any of the players really being suspended. They're all guys that'll probably go to the NBA next year. I don't know how you're gonna do things to the guys that are in the NBA now. They're getting paid. They're just going to stay quiet. But I think the guys that were involved behind the scenes, the sport agent type guys, they're the guys that are really going to take the hit. And I think it's really the FBI is just pissed off because they weren't involved. I think if the FBI, was getting a little cut of the money, I think that this would not be something that would be that big of a deal. But they're not getting a cut, so they're going to make a big deal about it. And I do agree with other people that say the FBI could be using their time and taxpayers' dollars for more important things than this. But when the money is the way the money is, and I'm sure the NCAA is really trying to crack down on players doing that. And I think the liberal ESPN has really brought in this take of players should be paid, and players need to create a union to get paid and all this, and that's just where ESPN's at right now. They're really liberal. They literally will take any side that they think will get the most amount of people on their board, and that's the most cliche, easy thing to say. They're only going to show you things like Stan Van Gundy saying that players should be paid, and that that it's racist because there's white players that are in NBA and in hockey that do this all the time and take way less money, and they just don't want to see a 18, 19-year-old being a millionaire at 18 or 19, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because all they got to do is wait one more year, play 1 year of college ball, and then they can go to the NBA. And, can they not wait one more year not to get paid? But that's just that's ranting about that. I mean, let's talk about the tournament now. Really good tournament coming up. I think this is going to be a really good tournament because there are a couple of really good teams. But other than those really good teams, there's a lot of teams. Like, it's really going to be matchups, and it's going to be really who's hot at the right time. The way that Xavier played last year in the tournament, I think they got a 6 or 7 seed. And maybe even lower than that, but they played, it might have been 11. I don't really remember what they were. But they kind of not – I don't necessarily want to say they were misseeded because they didn't have Edmund Sumter, and that was somebody that was really good for them at the first of the year. So, but they went to like the Elite Eight I don't think they went to the Final Four. I think they went to the Elite Eight, and that was that just kind of came out of nowhere. And there was a good amount of teams last year. But anyway, so the way my seeds are looking right now, the top 3 are pretty easy. Virginia is definitely the number 1 seed. They got the top RPI. I'm not big on RPI, though. I will say that. RPI, to me, is something that if you don't pay attention all year, I feel like that's kind of something the committee uses because they don't really pay attention all year, and that's something that easy for them to look at, to reference as, comparing teams. But, Virginia has a good strength of schedule. They're in the best conference. I think Virginia is the number 1. Kansas and Xavier, those could be tossed between, number 2 or number 3. Xavier has a really tough strength of schedule. Kansas has a really tough strength of schedule. They've had really good years. Kansas won the Big 12 again. Xavier is in first place right now in the Big East above Villanova. So that looks good for them. Now, Villanova and North Carolina, they're my 4 and my 5, overall. If North Carolina can win the ACC championship tournament, I think they could maybe be bolstered up to a 1. I think they have the 4th toughest schedule or 2nd toughest schedule, something like that. They're way up there in strength of schedule. Villanova is at 11. Villanova doesn't necessarily have bad losses, but they have some losses on the road, and that's something that I look at. I think I value road victories. And, head-to-head victories is like, against another team that's in the tournament or another team that you're comparing to is a big deal to me. But road victories is something that I do like. I like looking at the top 50 RPI versus, what your record is versus top 50 RPI. You'll notice some of these teams at the back half don't really have good records against the top 50 RPI. But I have Villanova as the 4 right now. If the Villanova can win the Big East tournament, I think that's good enough reason to make them the number 1. But North Carolina and them are right there. Auburn is my 2nd, number 2. Auburn's a team that has just really impressed all year. I like Auburn. Duke is is another number 2, and then I have Tennessee as my other 2. And Tennessee could really, they're that last 2, so they could really be flipped with Clemson, who I have at 3. Clemson has a real tough strength of schedule, good RPI, really good season, even though they don't have DeAndre Grantham I think it's Dante Grantham. Wichita State right there at 3. I think them and Cincinnati, that they'll have a game this next week, and then they might play in that ACC or AAC tournament. So that could be another game between them, and that could really determine who's the 3 and who's the 4 between those two. I got Purdue as my 3. I'm really impressed with Purdue. Earlier in the year, they were one of those like 1 seeds early in the year, and when you look at resume, the Big Ten just hasn't helped themselves out, but Purdue actually helped themselves out with their non-conference schedule, and they got some good wins in their non-conference schedule. I honestly, even though they didn't win the Big Ten, and maybe if they win the Big Ten tournament, a 3 is more likely for them, but I have them as a 3, and then I have Cincinnati as my last 3. As my 4s, I have Kentucky as a 4. Kentucky has the number 4 strength of schedule. They have a pretty high RPI. I think they're 8-6 against top 50 RPI teams. Arizona is another 4. Arizona's 5-2 against top 50 APR teams. Their strength of schedule is in the top 50. I think around 43. I think what it was. Arizona looks like the best team out of the Pac-12. If they can win the Pac-12 tournament, they should be able to sustain a 4. Rhode Island is a team that I really like. Their RPI is real high. They challenged themselves at the first of the year, played some really good teams, and they've only lost 2 games in conference this year so far. I don't really see this team winning the Atlantic 10 tournament. If they did, I think a 3 maybe. They may have a chance to get a 3, but I have them as a 4. I like them. And then Michigan State, probably wondering why I hadn't mentioned Michigan State. Now, Michigan State, this is something you got to understand about the tournament. Michigan State may look like they're the second or like they may look like a 2 seed or a 1 seed, but if you go and you look at their resume, they have the 89th strength of schedule, and they really don't have any good wins. Purdue at home. I think they beat North Carolina at a neutral site, which is a good win. But other than that, that's their only 2 games that they won in the top 50 RPI. I think they're 2-3 against other top 50 RPI teams. And I know they only have 3 losses, but they're just not a team that I'm high on. The Big Ten is not as good as it's been in the past. I don't think their seeds are going to be that great this year. And so Michigan State is my 4th 4, and they definitely could be higher. They definitely might be higher. But I am not, when I'm comparing them to these other teams, you can get on CBS Sports and you can go to or just type in RPI comparison, and it'll let you compare 2 teams together. What I like to do is I like to make another open up another link or whatever, and so I compare 4. I can compare 4 teams at a time. So that's kind of how I generate this list. And comparing them to other teams is just Kentucky, Arizona, and Rhode Island. They honestly have better resumes than them. But Michigan State is a top 4 seed, and they're a good team. But when you look at their resume compared to other teams, they don't really look that much better. If they get matched up against Purdue in the Big Ten championship, like somewhere in there, I'm sure it would only be the championship game because they're 1-2. But that could be a game where they show, okay, we're pretty good, and they could move up. And, Michigan State could move up depending on how they play in the Big Ten tournament. But I'm just not that high on them. I think they're going to be good, but then this is what's going to happen. They're going to get most people will think, oh, Michigan State got misseeded, but they're not really going to get misseeded. I think it's good that they don't get a high seed. I think they should have to challenge themselves a little bit. So I have them at 4. At 5, Texas Tech. They've kind of had a blunder as of lately. Their strength of schedule is only 55. Still a high seed. They've dealt with injuries throughout the year. They're finally getting back healthy. Well, if Keenan Evans can get healthy, but I got them as a 5. Nevada, I have at 5. I really like Nevada. They're pretty high. They have a pretty high RPI, top 15. They're number 15 RPI. Strength of schedules, 60s or so. So, when you look at them, they compare right with Michigan State. I understand that they're not maybe as in good of a conference as Michigan State, but Michigan State is not. This is not the Big Ten of old or of past years. Houston I have as a 5. Houston has been really impressive. They have wins over Cincinnati, Wichita State. They didn't even have a home court all year. They played at Texas Southern, I think it was. So this is a team I think is tested for the tournament and can test people in the tournament. I have them as a 5. Texas A&M, maybe a little bit of a surprise, but they do have the 7th toughest schedule, and they dealt with injuries throughout the year. This is a team that I think maybe a little bit lower seeded by the committee because of their record and because they have a below 500 record in the SEC. But when I'm comparing them to these other teams, I like Texas A&M, and I think Texas A&M is a 5. 6s, I've got West Virginia as a 6. West Virginia, that press is really good at home, but it just doesn't travel well. And I'm not gonna seed them as if they're playing at home. I'm not gonna try to think like, oh wow. Like in the past, I've always been like, man, West Virginia is really scary. They're a really good team, but they're really good at home. And their strength of schedule is like 50. It's good, but it's not great. So I got them at 6. Butler has a surprisingly good strength of schedule, pretty good RPI, and they have some good wins on the year. Kind of a surprise team. I got Butler as a 6. TCU has a really tough strength of schedule, 13, RPI 19. They're a team that to me I thought would be a little bit lower. I didn't realize their strength of schedule was so good, and so they're a 6 to me. Ohio State. They have a pretty high RPI, and their strength of schedule is really not that bad. They actually challenged themselves in the preseason, so I have them at 6. At 7, I have Seton Hall. Seton Hall has a strength of schedule of 27, so a pretty tough strength of schedule for them. And in RPI, they're still number 21. They went through a little bit of a cold spell, late in the year, but I think they're a 7 seed. Creighton, another team that's a 7 seed. They dealt with an injury to Martin Crampel middle of the year, which didn't help. But I think they have a 30 or 33rd strength of schedule, 35 in the RPI. And these numbers are always changing, after each win or after each loss. Maybe not the strength of schedule as much, but the RPI changes a lot. So, if you were listening to this and it's not on the same day, these things have probably changed a little bit. Arkansas, I have them as a 7. I've been impressed with Arkansas this year, and they've been getting some good wins lately. And I think their strength of schedule is like 40, RPI 30. Miami, I have Miami as a 7 seed. Miami lost Bryce Brown, basically their best player late in the year, and they have struggled a bit, but I think he's going to come back. I think they're a 7. I think if you seed them any lower than that, you're you might misseed them since they don't have Bryce Brown, and they have played pretty good without him. So I have Miami as a 7. At 8, I have Oklahoma. I was wondering why ESPN was kind of doing this shit where they were kind of trying to say, Oklahoma's falling lower and lower, but they have the 12 toughest strength of schedule. They're well into the tournament. And I got them as an 8. They could be a 7. Gonzaga I have as an 8. I'm usually pretty high on Gonzaga, and I just hadn't been as impressed with Gonzaga this year. Their strength of schedule is not good. RPI is 29. They have only lost 4 games, and if they win the West Coast Conference, I think they could go up to a 7. But I'm not going to just help them out and give them a good seed because of their history. Missouri's has a really good resume, 24 strength of schedule. Their RPI is in the 40s. And Missouri was a team, if you watched my last video, they're a team I was talking about maybe being on the bubble, a team I wasn't that sold on just because talent-wise they're not that good, but their resume is too good to leave out or whatever. I have them as an 8. Florida could be a little bit higher, but their RPI is not good. It's like 58 compared to a lot of these other teams. Strength of schedule is 30. And they do have like 11 losses on the year. But I have them as an 8. They could be a little bit higher. Florida's a good team, but Florida's really helter-skelter. Either they're really hot or they're really cold. So they're not a team that I'm necessarily that high on. I don't think they, I think some people have them as like a 6, and I can't do that. That's just too high for me. I have Providence at 9. The Big East is surprisingly well this year. A lot of their teams have really good resumes. And so Providence I have as a 9. Michigan I have as a 9. Michigan, playing in the Big Ten, their record looks pretty good. They only have like 7 losses, but I can't put Michigan too high. I'm not high on the Big Ten this year. Alabama has like 12 to 13 losses, but they have the 6th strength of schedule. They may be a little bit lower. They may be a 10, but I like Alabama. I think Alabama deserves to be in the tournament, and they do have a really tough schedule, and they do have some good wins. Arizona State, it was a team that I had, maybe as like a 3 or 4, after the preseason, but the way that they played in conference play just isn't good. Their conference isn't really that strong. They're kind of like Florida. If they're not hot, if they're not shooting threes, this team's really not that good. So, we'll see which team shows up in the tournament. They really don't have any bad losses, though. That's another reason why they have stayed in the tournament, stayed pretty good in the tournament. But they did lose to Oregon State the other day. I have them as a 9. They could be a 10, though. So 10s, I don't think it's going to end up like this, but I have 4 ACC teams at my 10s. I'm sure some of them will be 9s. I'm sure some of them will be 10s. You could move Alabama back. You could move Arkansas, or you could move Arizona State back. I have Florida State. Florida State, they've been good, but their resume is impressive. They have some good wins throughout it, and that may make them a 9. But I think their strength of schedule is only like 75 or 70, something like that, and then their RPI is 51. So I'm not completely sold on Florida State. I'm sold on them making the tournament. If you're, they're in the tournament. Don't get me wrong, but they're, I can't really see them that high. Their resume doesn't give them justice to do that. Louisville's talked about being on the bubble, and I just don't really see it. Louisville, if you compare their resumes, if you compare these 4 teams' resumes, Florida State, Virginia Tech, and NC State are pretty close together, but Louisville looks honestly better than them. Louisville has a better RPI. Louisville has a better strength of schedule. The only thing that's holding Louisville back is their record against teams in the top 50 RPI. They're 2 and 10, and that just, it doesn't look good, and that's a reason to kind of have them a little bit lower. But I think Louisville's for sure in. As I mentioned, Virginia Tech, Louisville has 2 wins against Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech got a good win against Duke the other night. They have a win against Virginia on the road. And they've been playing a lot better than they did at the first of the year. They were really struggling at the first of the year. I like this team. Buzz Williams is a good coach. I think they're for sure in. NC State has the best record in the ACC compared to all these teams, and they have some good wins. North Carolina, Duke, they beat Arizona in the preseason. This is a team that's for sure in to me. So the top 10 seeds are for sure in. I have St. Bonaventure in. Syracuse is a team that's talked about making it. They're right on the bubble. And so if you have any issues with, if you have Syracuse in your bracket and you don't have St. Bonaventure, there's just something wrong with you, because St. Bonaventure beat them on the road. And St. Bonaventure also beat Maryland. Not that Maryland's that good, but that was before Maryland had all the injuries. And then they've just been on like a light lately. They hadn't lost. I think they've won like 10 or 11 in a row. They're just rolling. Middle Tennessee is another team that, if they don't win their conference tournament, you have to consider them. They have better resumes than, these last couple teams that I'm going to mention. So Middle Tennessee as an 11. I have them as that. St. Mary's is another 11. Now, St. Mary's only has 4 losses on the year, but I don't see St. Mary's winning the West Coast Championship over Gonzaga, and if they do, they'll seed will go higher. But they're a team that I'm honestly, they're going to be in the tournament. The tournament. After I looked at this, the tournament's pretty much determined. There's only like there's only like really 6 teams that really can like eke their way in or fall out. So, but St. Mary's is one that might fall back and they might be playing in a play-in game. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did. And I think they're for sure a tournament team. I think they for sure will make the tournament. I think they for sure deserve to make the tournament. But their seeding should not be that high. You know, they didn't, take care of business against Washington State and in Georgia early in the year. They lost a couple games in the West Coast Conference. They do play good against Gonzaga, but, we don't really what kind of in a year like this, Gonzaga was like a top seed last year. And they made the NCAA tournament. That they're not that team this year. And so St. Mary's is kind of getting this love because they compete with Gonzaga so well. And so we're kind of putting them on the same pedestal as Gonzaga. And I can't do that. They're an 11. They're, like I said, they're for sure a tournament team, but they might be playing in a play-in game at the end of the year. So then 12s, I'll just say my 12s because one of the play-in games is 11, one of the play-in games is a 12. My 12s is Loyola Chicago, which most likely will probably be the winner of the Missouri Valley Conference. Louisiana, a really good team out of the Sun Belt, and then New Mexico State out of the WAC. Those are 3 teams that are probably 12s that I'm looking at. So the first 4, the last teams that are going to get in, I have USC. USC by far has the best resume of the bubble teams. They're the first of the bubble teams that all these other teams to me are in. When they try to bullshit you and tell you Louisville's on the bubble, Virginia Tech's on the bubble, or St.Bonaventure's on the bubble, we're not going to entertain any of that. Those teams are in. USC is the first bubble team, and they're the least bubbly team. If we're looking at, there's 5 or 6 teams, like I said. USC is the one that's just most likely in. They're second in the Pac-12. They've been playing really good without Benny Boatwright. I think they're actually better without Benny Boatwright. So they're probably going to have to play in the first 4. But I like them. They're a good team. And I have them matched up against Baylor. So Baylor would be my last team in. Baylor has a good strength of schedule at 22. One thing I don't like about Baylor, and I honestly was going to leave, I wanted to leave Baylor off. If Baylor didn't have 2 wins against Texas, I would have left them out and put Texas in. But because I think they have 2 wins against Texas. Yeah, they have 2 wins against Texas. If they didn't have those 2 wins against Texas, if they would have split, I probably would have had Texas in my tournament. So Baylor is the last team in for me. And then Kansas State, Kansas State is kind of high on some people's brackets, like a 10. Lenardi has them as 11 as the, last 4 bye type thing. I'm kind of wow, why? When you look at their resumes like I was against, Texas and Baylor and Syracuse, it's all worse. But then you go down and you find out that they have 2 wins against Texas, they have a win against Baylor. So if you're wanting to put Baylor and Texas in a tournament, you have to put Kansas State in because Kansas State beat them, straight up. And so Kansas State's pretty much in. The Kansas State is going to have to do a lot to really play themselves out. And they're really not going to do that. They played TCU tonight. I don't know if they won or not. And then I don't think they did. And then they're going to play in the tournament. They have one more game and they're going to play in the tournament. And unless Texas wins the Big 10 tournament or the Big 12 tournament, that's the only way I could see them leaving Kansas State off, or leaving Baylor. I feel like they would even leave Baylor off before they left Kansas State off. So Kansas State's pretty safe, but they're one of those last teams in. Syracuse is a team that at the end of the year I was, or towards the end of this year I was comparing them to NC State, Virginia Tech, and NC State beat them at home or at Syracuse. I think they lost a game to Virginia Tech. Like all those bubble teams that were kind of bubbly, and then like Syracuse, every time you asked them to like win a big game, like the North Carolina game, they lost. The Duke game, they got slaughtered. So like they just haven't really been helping themselves out. And like, but they have the 15th toughest schedule. Their RPI is not bad, and so they're a team that I honestly like am putting in the tournament right now. And because I just don't see them putting 3 like Big 12 teams in at the first 4, because they're not going to have them play each other. I think the most that they would have would be 2. And that may be reason why Kansas State's a little bit higher, because they don't think they're going to have, they won't have that many teams from the same conference in the first 4. But so yeah, I have Syracuse versus Kansas State, USC versus Baylor as my like first 4 matchups. My first 4 teams that are out. Texas to me is really the only team that can be considered like challenging these other 4 teams, and they just don't. They can't win. They can't win the battle between Kansas State and Baylor because they've lost head to head to all of them. So you can't really justify anything for Texas there. I'm not high on the Pac-12. Washington has a pretty good resume. I could see them making a little Mike Hopkins versus Jim Boeheim matchup and having Washington play Syracuse. That could be something that could happen. But Texas and Washington are the only teams that I'm really looking at to really maybe take a spot. UCLA has really not helped them out with the way they played last week. Their strength of schedule and RPI is not that good. It's worse than Washington's. Boise State doesn't have enough. They are 0-1 or 1-0 against top 50 RPI teams. I can't put them in unless they win their tournament. And another thing is, there could be some teams that win their conference tournament, and like these spots that I think I have could start to be knocked off. Like if Rhode Island or St.Bonaventure doesn't win the Atlantic 10, that's gonna take a spot away, and that's gonna make like Baylor lose their spot. It'll knock teams down the podium, and it just goes for if teams that like are gonna make the tournament, like if Middle Tennessee doesn't win their tournament, they're a team that will take one of these spots. They have a better resume than some of these teams. So these teams could be knocked down the podium if some of the smaller schools don't win games. My next 4 after that would be Utah, Mississippi State, Marquette, and Georgia. These teams really have no shot. This is just my next 4 teams. Utah is a team that is right. Like, look, their resume is exactly like UCLA's. I just like UCLA a little bit better than I like Utah. Mississippi State has like a positive record in the SEC. They're pretty high up there, but they didn't challenge themselves. Their strength of schedule is really bad. Marquette has a really good strength of schedule, but they just have too many losses. In Georgia, they're like, they're not bad or nothing, but their resume doesn't match up as good as these other teams. So like 4 other teams to say. I mean, Oklahoma State really has 0 chance. Well, Western Kentucky is not going to get in on an at-large bid, but Western Kentucky has like a 54 RPI, and I have win against Purdue, and that was a really good win. Nebraska has a good ass record in the Big Ten, and like you would think, why is this team not in? But then you check their strength of schedule. It's like 109 or something, RPI 59. They just, can't be considered. And then Notre Dame's like record and resume is not bad, but, no Bonzi Colson. Their RPI is like, I think maybe top 50 or so, but not RPI. Their strength of schedule is like maybe top 50 or top 30 or something like that, but their RPI is in like the 70s. They really can't be considered. So, like I said, really, we're like the bubble teams to me that we're really considering. I don't think Louisville's a team to consider. I don't think St. Bonaventure's a team to consider. I think they're in. The teams that I'm looking at, USC, I think USC is honestly in. Baylor, Kansas State, Syracuse, Texas, Washington. Maybe you can put UCLA in if UCLA has a good Pac-12 tournament, if they get some good wins there. Boise State might still a spot. I don't think Boise State's going to get in at an at-large bid, though. So then, talking about the conference tournaments are this next week. And, the AAC, we know Wichita State or Cincinnati is probably going to win, maybe Houston. The ACC, it's a top toss-up, Virginia, North Carolina, Duke. The American East, I predict Vermont to win that. The A10, I really the A10 is one of my favorite tournaments. I really don't see Rhode Island winning it. I don't really see Bonaventure winning it. So that could take a spot from somebody. I don't know who would beat one of them, but that could take a spot from somebody. The Atlantic Sun, I think Florida Gulf Coast is going to win. Lipscomb is another team that could give them trouble. The Big East, Nova or Xavier, and I wouldn't be surprised if St. John's is that surprise team that makes a run. They lost a lot of close games throughout the year, and they play games throughout the year at Madison Square Garden. So they're the most familiar with the Madison Square Garden, and I could see them. Well, I don't know. Maybe they switched that to Brooklyn this year. But anyways, if they play at Madison Square Garden, that could help them out. Now they're like last in the Big East or whatever, but just a team I'm looking like that could make a Cinderella kind of run to the tournament. Big Sky, Montana is the favorite. They're the number 1 seed. Idaho and Weber State we're 2 games back throughout the year. So those are teams to consider. Big South should be a good tournament. Radford and Winthrop are the 2 and the 3. They should match up against each other. Asheville's the 1. I like Winthrop in this conference. I like Xavier Cooks. He's one of my favorite players. Big Ten, I'm looking at Michigan State or Purdue. You know, there could be a dark horse that rolls through there and beats one of them and maybe steals a spot for the tournament. Big 12's a toss-up. Kansas usually never wins the Big 12 championship. You know, Texas, Baylor, Kansas State, if they could somehow come through and win it, that would solidify their spot. Maybe, you know, Trae Young can get hot and they can win. I don't really see West Virginia's press traveling that well to that. Texas Tech, they've been dealing with injuries lately. I don't know if I see them. And then TCU could, but TCU has some really slow starts to a lot of their games, so that might not be good for that. Big West is another good one. A lot of good teams at the top. UC Davis, UC Santa Barbara, UC Irvine, one of them probably going to win that. Don't forget about Hawaii, Long Beach State, Colonial, Northeastern, or Charleston. Conference USA, on Thursday we actually have Middle Tennessee State and Western Kentucky playing. That should be a really good game. Really excited about that one. And dark horse, I'd say Old Dominion. The Horizon League is a league that I've kind of been paying attention to all year. I liked Oakland at the first year. They have Kendrick Nunn, transferred from Illinois, and he's a stud. He shits on this league, but they just haven't played that good during the year. They lose to some of the badder teams too. University of Illinois Chicago, they're good, but they can't win against Wright State or Northern Kentucky. I would take Northern Kentucky. Northern Kentucky's kind of been the team that I've liked all year, but Wright State, they just play really good as a team, and they're always in the games. So this is going to be a fun tournament too. The Ivy League, Penn and Harvard are the 2 best teams. Dark horse, Princeton. The MEAC, Rider and Kansas, they were the top 2 teams in the league, but Iona and that coach, I forgot his name, he always somehow just gets a game plan, and Iona always somehow makes the tournament, winning the MEAC. So Iona, watch out for them. In the MAC, Buffalo is definitely the best team. Watch out for Toledo, Ball State, Kent State. Kent State played Buffalo and beat them earlier in the year in a good game. Ball State has this kid that's really good, had a really good game against Notre Dame earlier in the year, and Toledo is probably the second best team in the MAC. The MEAC has like 5 teams that are all tied at like 5-11 or something like that. So that should be a fun. I mean, I'm not gonna watch that shit, but that should be a fun one to see who comes out on that. Missouri Valley, I've got Loyola Chicago as the top team, and I suspect Loyola Chicago to win it. But if they don't win it, I don't think they make the tournament. Illinois State and Southern Illinois are other good teams in that conference. Illinois State doesn't have a good record, but they have like a 51 strength of schedule. Southern Illinois is another good team. Missouri State, really disappointing year out of Missouri State. I really thought Missouri State was the best team going into the year. They have like the best player in Alizé Johnson. We'll see if Alizé can have a good tournament or whatever, and definitely check out Alizé, and because he's a fun player to watch. The Mountain West, Nevada, I think Nevada's going to win. Watch out for Boise State. There's a couple of dark horse teams there in the Mountain West too. When you talk about Fresno, New Mexico, Wyoming, UNLV, and San Diego State, all those teams are quality teams. In the Northeast, Wagner has had a pretty good year, but there's some other good teams in the Northeast. Mount St. Mary's, St. Francis, Pennsylvania. It are some other ones. The SEC is I mean, when I try to think about the SEC, it's just a toss-up. Missouri could win, Auburn can win, Tennessee can win, Arkansas, Alabama, Florida, A&M, Kentucky. Any of those teams could win. Mississippi State could even make a little bit of a run there. So that one's a fun one. That was one of the more exciting, big conference ones. Pac-12, that's another exciting one. Arizona should win, but USC could win, Arizona State could win, Washington, UCLA, Utah could really solidify their tournament chances with a win there. Patriot League, Bucknell, Bucknell's a scary kind of team. They challenge themselves in the preseason, and they're always a team that's in the tournament. I know they beat when I was a kid and I was growing up, they beat Kansas one year as like a 15 or so seed. And I don't know, they're just always there. When you talk about Ohio Valley, that should be a real fun one. Belmont, Murray State is actually first and got first this year, but Belmont to me is the team to beat. They usually handle Murray State. They had issues with Jacksonville State. They lost to Jacksonville State twice this year, but luckily they won't be matched up against Jacksonville State. If they get to the semifinals, they're going to take on Austin Peay. Jacksonville State and Murray State will have to go at each other. I suspect Belmont and Murray State to play each other, and I suspect Belmont to win. Belmont plays good against Murray State. And the SoCon, this is a fun one. They got 5 good teams. Wofford and Mercer are not as good teams, but East Tennessee State should win. I like East Tennessee State, but watch out for Furman. Devin Sibley's a good player, and then North Carolina Greensboro is a second place team, I think, and they're not bad. They have a kid named Alonzo that's pretty good. The Summit will probably be South Dakota, Mike Mooney versus Mike Dahm, South Dakota State. South Dakota State will probably win. Mike Dahm is a hell of a player. He scored us tons of points. The Southland, kind of a toss-up. My team kind of going into the year would have been Stephen F. Austin. But there's some other good teams that have came up in that. Sam Houston and Southeast Louisiana had a good year. Nicholls State got first. So those are some good teams. In the WCC, obviously Gonzaga or St. Mary's is going to win that. Dark Horse, BYU. The SWAC, there's like 4 pretty good teams. Grambling, Arkansas Pine Bluff, Southern, Prairie View, Texas Southern. And then the WAC, New Mexico State is honestly probably going to win that, but they did drop games in the year against Utah Valley and Seattle, 2 of the better teams in that, and then Grand Canyon is another good college in that conference, but I suspect New Mexico State to win, and then the Sun Belt to finish it off. I like Louisiana. Louisiana has a top 50 RPI. They've done really good against this league this year, but there's a couple of good teams in it. When we talk about Georgia Southern, we talk about Georgia State, and then the team that I liked at the first of the year that's really been disappointing is UTA, UT Arlington. And I mean, UT Arlington's kind of like what you would call the dark horse of that one.
I be that pretty motherfucker. Harlem's what I'm reppin'. Tell my niggas with the bitch and we gon' make it in a second. Never disrespected. Plus I'm well connected with this coke that I imported. Just important as your president. Swagger so